All right, welcome to day 3 of this week's Quarantine Home Bible Study. We're talking about Old Testament references to life after death, and it is throughout the Old Testament. There's several places where life after death, heaven, paradise, Sheol, all these different things are mentioned. So it is throughout the Old Testament, but it's one of those things that not as clearly developed as it is in the New Testament. Anyway, we're going to look at a couple of those stories today of people who died, but died in unusual ways. All right, so we're going to look at that today. So the first one we're going to be at is in Genesis chapter 5, the first mention of the afterlife in the Bible. So Genesis 5 is where we're going to be. If you want to turn there, let's go. Okay, I've done this once before, but we're going to read about 3 different passages. So instead of showing you them in the Bible and drawing pictures, I'm just going to print out these verses and we'll discuss them as we go. Like I said, these are people in the Bible who died, but not really the way we normally think of death, okay? The Bible uses, there's a couple of people where the Bible talks about people who or what we would call translated, okay? They didn't technically die. They were taken to heaven, okay? But both of these passages, both of these stories do talk about the afterlife a little bit. And like I said, the first mention of the afterlife is in Genesis 5:24, with the story of Enoch, okay? Now, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him away. Okay, so when it says that he walked with God, there are only a couple of people in the Bible mentioned with that phrase. Another one was Noah that says he walked with God, and meant that he was righteous, that he had a relationship with God. Okay, and so what it's basically saying is that in his generation, this is before the flood, those people who lived before the flood, not very many of them were good. Okay, so in that time between between Adam and Noah was pretty wicked. Okay, that's why God had to destroy the world with wickedness. And one of those people who was righteous, though, there was an exception to the rule, kind of like Seth and maybe a couple of others, not very many. Was Enoch. Enoch walked with God. And then it says, and then he was no more because God took him away. So the theological word for this is translated. That he was translated. That he didn't really die. Okay? That he was taken to heaven. Okay? Like a rapture before the rapture. We don't know exactly how that works. But somehow God took him. He didn't technically die. He just went on a long walked with God to heaven, and was never seen on earth again. Okay, so that's the one story there. Enoch is mentioned again. He's not mentioned a lot in the Bible, but another place that he is mentioned is in Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11. Anytime you see that, that's the Hall of Faith. Okay, that's all the great men and women of the Old Testament, and their faith and the things that God did through them with their faith. Okay, so Enoch is mentioned there in the Hall of Faith, and let me get to where I can see the whole verse on the camera here. It says, by faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For he was taken, so before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. Okay, so let's unpack this a little bit. It says he did not experience death, okay, because he was translated, okay, that he was taken up, kind of like, again, a rapture before the rapture the rest of us will experience. He could not be found, because like I said, he just kind of went on a long walk, and he was taken away by God. Okay, you see that word taken again here, right? God took him. He was taken away by God. So this is a hint of the afterlife, okay? That there was some other place. And you see it's all the way back here in Genesis. There was some other place after a person died, okay? So the afterlife is mentioned way back here in Genesis, okay? Short, just a couple of chapters after the fall of man, when people start dying. The afterlife is already something that people understood, okay? And that Enoch just was taken there, and he was taken there because he pleased God, okay? So he was such a good, righteous person that God, that he was taken. He just didn't die. He was translated. There you see that word again, okay? Now, one other person in the Bible is mentioned as being translated, having this kind of unusual end. I don't really want to call it a death because he didn't really die. The other person was Elijah, okay? And he's talked about a lot. His is maybe a little more famous, his story, right? The chariot of fire. Let's look at that verse, 2 Kings 2, 10, and 11. He responded, "You have asked a hard thing, yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted to you. If not, it will not." And they continued walking and talking, and a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended into the whirlwind into heaven. Okay. So there's a conversation there, and Elijah is taken to heaven. Okay, so what is happening here, the people that Elijah is talking to, or the person Elijah is talking to, this conversation is between Elijah and Elisha. Okay, Elisha was being mentored by Elijah. Okay, and the question says, "You've asked a hard thing." The question that Elisha asks, because he knows that Elijah's about to go. Okay, and he says, "I want a double portion of your spirit." He says, "You've asked a hard thing." Basically, I don't know if I can do that for you. He says, but again, you see that word, "I am being taken from you." Okay, being taken, again, that means translated. Okay, I'm being taken from you. And that basically says, I don't know if it's going to be granted to you. But they continued walking and talking. This is Elijah and Elisha. They cross a river, the water parts, kind of like the Jordan River. Or the Red Sea. They walk across on dry land. Okay, another one of those water parting stories. And they leave a group of prophets. Elisha is kind of a mentor of a bunch of a school of prophets. So these 50 prophets are left behind, and Elijah is taken on this chariot of fire while they were talking. Okay, so again, Elijah, he says the word is ascended. It's kind of similar to that he was taken. He was taken. Okay, so there you have again the rapture before the rapture, or people being taken who are still alive into heaven. And there's only two people, Enoch and Elijah, that have that kind of a status. Now Moses had a little bit of a different type of a thing, where he died, but he was buried by God. God took care of him, but he died. The only two people that went straight to heaven that are mentioned in the Bible, Elijah and Enoch. Now, some people look at that as maybe they'll be the two witnesses who come back in Revelation, because they're the two who didn't really die, and that may be the case. We'll wait and see. But the point of this story is that there is an afterlife. Okay, there is something waiting for us after death. Okay, and people understood that. And these two, Elijah and Elisha, are some who experience that afterlife without having to die. Now, we won't be so lucky. Chances are we will die, but it is possible that we could be raptured. Okay, so we could also experience what Enoch and Elijah happened. If we live up until the day that Jesus returns, up until the second, right before the second coming, I believe right before the tribulation, we would be raptured. So we will experience the same thing Elijah and Elisha did, that will be taken to heaven alive. So there will be some that'll happen. I don't know if we'll live that long or not. He may come after our lifetime, but it's possible there will be a group of believers who will experience the same thing Enoch and Elijah did. All right, so anyway, next week or tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about Old Testament references to the afterlife, to heaven, things like that. So we will see you tomorrow.